Hey guys, this is Anand from AnandTech.com. This is the official AnandTech Podcast. This is episode 4. If you notice, my voice is a little hoarse today. I actually just flew out to San Francisco and spent the greater part of the evening talking to a whole bunch of really smart folks at AMD. Including, this was my first time talking to AMD's Jim Keller. So if you do remember, Jim Keller is he was the chief architect on K8. He was an architect on K7. More recently, he worked on Apple's A4 and A5 SoCs. I can't really say anything about the conversation we had other than he's awesome. I haven't felt this good about someone at AMD's CPU, at the head of AMD's CPU group since probably since the days of Fred Weber. So very confidence inspiring, which is very good to hear. So I had a great conversation with him. At some point, I'm going to try and get him in front of all of you guys so we can kind of publicly have a little bit of discussion there. Because I think, like I said, he convinced me and I have faith in what him and his teams are going to be able to do here over the next few years. It's not going to be easy, but it's definitely a good hire on AMD's part. Anyways, so we have a special podcast here for you today. I'm joined by Brian Klug, our senior smartphone editor, and he is out of Tucson right now, right, Brian?
That's right. Yeah, I'm home for a couple days.
Yeah, so where
you can empathize with this. Yeah.
Exactly. So we were both in New York, 3 days ago?
That's right. Yeah, last week. That was fun.
And then I was home for 2 days, and then I flew out here for this AMD event at the Giants game tonight, as well as IDF and the big Apple event, which you're flying out for.
That's right. That'll be exciting. So that's coming up. Yep.
And so this is your first Apple event, right?
That's right. Yeah. So all those people who criticize me for being an Apple fanboy, even though that doesn't happen very often, thankfully.
That's good. Well, I mean, you're pretty neutral, right?
That's right. I can't complain.
Yeah,
this is the first.
And the one thing a lot of people don't get, I remember when you've been working on this Nokia PureView 808 thing. You didn't,
forever now.
You didn't
should probably finish that.
But you didn't just work on the camera, right? Like you actually became a Symbian user.
Yeah, which is easier. Well, it's not easier than it sounds. It's pretty difficult. I mean, I put my T-Mobile SIM in there, and a lot of people know that number, and so I've been using it pretty much all the time.
But what's your you get Symbian now, right? Like you understand it. You could totally use it as a day-to-day device if necessary.
I could use it. I don't know if I'd necessarily say that I want to. I mean, There's obviously a lot of friction still there. I think the thing is that when I was working on that review, and I still am, the question was, well, do we just review it as a camera and sort of gloss over Symbian, or we have to? It's inexplicably a review of the entire device, so really to just gloss over Symbian would be terrible, right? Like,
yeah,
ultimately that's a grave disservice both to Nokia and anybody who's interested in buying the device. So yeah, I mean that's kind of our policy, I guess, is that we always try to use the thing as a phone when you can, right? And that's why I like using the devices with SIM cards, obviously, because I can put my normal SIM in there. But yeah, that's a fair characterization.
But I think that's an important point, right? Like that you really do try to incorporate all of the devices you use like into your daily life, right?
Yeah, there's plenty of space in my pocket for like 3 or 4 devices. I switched some of my clothing wear around so that I could wear more phones.
So how many
I'm
phones
searching for like late 90s sort of like pants and shorts that are cargo shorts. I know that sounds ridiculous, but there is some level of dedication here to carrying and testing a bunch of things. Like those 511 tactical shorts are great. They're just magical for carrying like a ton of smartphones, even though they're expensive.
Wait, so I'm not familiar. What are the 511 tactical shorts?
Oh, they're like 511 is a brand that's like it's tactical. It's like for like I don't know how to describe it. Sort of like firearms enthusiasts. It's tactical clothing.
Okay.
Some of it is like polo shirts. Some of it's like there's tactical shorts. So the tactical I mean, it sort of makes you look like a police officer.
Okay.
But They're the only ones that I can find anymore with just like huge pockets.
Are they comfortable?
Like, yeah, they're pretty comfortable. Yeah, they're a little bit, they're just really well built. Honestly, that's the big thing. Hiking, outdoors. Obviously, if you carry a firearm, they're just great. They're like made for that. So, but I carry tons of smartphones. So,
wait, so how many phones do you normally carry like on a regular basis?
At least two. Most of the time, three. Okay. I have two AT&T lines and one T-Mobile line personally, and so those I always try to carry. But yeah, it just depends. Depends on what we're reviewing.
So of those two or three, I'm assuming one's an iPhone and then two are usually Android devices?
That's right, yeah. And see, there's where, I think a lot of the, for the last like couple months, I've been using an Android device as the number one, daily driver. So,
and why
Galaxy
is that?
S3. I find that there are more friction points, more things that I miss when I'm on iOS now than when I'm on Android. It just depends. Like when I'm on Android, I miss iMessage. When I'm on iOS, I sort of miss, SwiftKey 3, Chrome, like actual working Chrome that's not just WebKit.
Yeah.
And, just like a bunch of subtle things, widgets. Like I have all my IP cameras.
Yes.
And the widgets application IP Cam Viewer has a great widget functionality. So I can just at a glance look at all my cameras on the home screen. Stuff like that just varies, but yeah, that's the main thing. It's sort of anecdotal, but...
No, I think that's very interesting, right? Because like usually when I encounter someone who only uses one or the other, they can't, like they have no appreciation for what the other platform offers that's an advantage, right? It's normally... Like I remember, so when I was in New York, both you and I were in New York at the same time doing different things, and we'll get to that in a second. But I had the new Motorola Droid Razr M with me, and I was having dinner with a friend who happened to be an iPhone user, and he asked me what I thought of the phone, and I was like, hey, it's actually pretty cool. And his immediate response was, but it's not an iPhone, but it runs Android.
Yeah, that's shocking. That's, again, like we've discussed this a lot. There's not a lot of cross-platform shopping. There's not a lot of people who sort of stop and evaluate what the differences are. And I think that Android still has a stigma for being sort of laggy.
Yes.
And, the UI isn't as consistent, even though that's largely gone away with 4.1. But unfortunately, 4.1 isn't available on anything but the Galaxy Nexus.
Yes.
So, yeah, I carry that around overclocked a lot now. And... it'll be a battle to see who gets, whether the HTC One X or the Galaxy S3, both international, get the 4.1 push first, and that will sort of define. But yeah, I feel like a lot of people who sort of did this evaluation like 2 years ago, or maybe a year ago, they haven't really kept up with it, right? And there's not as much cross pollination in terms of I'm constantly evaluating what mobile platform I'm on. I'm curious to hear what you think of the Razr M though, because I played with like 2 or 3 of them at the event I was at, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well.
Yeah. So I was in my to-do list in New York was I went to the Microsoft Nokia Windows Phone 8 thing, and then I went to the Motorola thing. And then the next day, I had an NDA'd Samsung event, which you'll get to hear about tomorrow, I believe. So at the Motorola event, Google and Motorola, and I have to say, Motorola and Google did a great job of making the event feel fairly professional, which was good. Like I think I looked at my clock and it was 39 or 40-ish minutes start to finish.
That's good.
Which I thought was a good length.
But minus the sing-along?
No, minus the sing-along. They had a band up, and I don't normally like commenting on stuff like that, right? Because it's not. It has nothing to do with the product, right? And it's only for, when people get all snarky about stuff like that, it only really applies to other press, and I feel like we don't run a site that's just like a big group of insider press folks, right? Like the readers don't care if Motorola had a weird band, at the beginning of their thing.
But the band was ironic, right? It was the Kins, which is like a blow across Microsoft's bow because of the Kin.
But do you think
the first smartphone I ever reviewed?
Do you think they would really do that? Like throw, effectively make fun of a band's name and invite the band all the way over there?
I think that was the reason, wasn't it? I mean, what else was it? How else was it relevant?
Yeah, right? I don't know. I don't know what to tell you.
It's the Kin. What other Kin was there? There was only the Kin 1 and Kin 2, which were those phones that, were great and interesting, and there was the Kin Studio.
Yeah.
They were like ahead of their time, and Tegra, and not all together as bad as everybody made them out to be. But
yeah, no, that's very true.
Commercial failure, like on the market for like 2 months.
Yeah, that's very true. So for those of you who don't know, at the beginning of the Motorola event, they had a band from Australia named The Kin come up and play like 4 or 5 songs. And like everyone was all going crazy because, not the audience, because we're a bunch of tech dudes, but which was a bit odd. Like I felt bad for the band. I felt like they were used to playing for audiences that maybe swooned a bit more than we did. And...
weren't 98% male. I mean, that's the reality of it, right?
Exactly. And we did a horrible job of singing along whenever they tried to get us to sing along, which was just I felt really bad.
Well, it's like everybody's there to get their job done, right? This isn't a concert. Like
exactly.
Everybody just kind of wants to do their job and see the device.
But I felt like other than that, Eric Schmidt gets on stage, and one, that's huge presence, right? Like of all the Android vendors, that Motorola can just have Eric Schmidt hop on stage and talk, I think is a big deal. And so he talked about, the 480 million Android devices, that have been sold into the market. And what was it, 1.3 million Android devices activated per day now?
Something like that. I don't recall the exact number, but
yeah. So it just started out like in a really good way. They had I was upset that they didn't disclose as much technical detail in the actual presentation. They would make claims like, hey, we are 20% faster than Safari on the iPhone, but they wouldn't really quantify it, and they wouldn't go any deeper than that. So that's
pretty standard. Yeah, I mean, Motorola's press releases didn't even really say what SoC was inside.
Yeah, and so Motorola's always done that, right? If you remember, like from their first Tegra-based phones, where they just called it Motorola Dual Core.
Yeah.
I get that Apple doesn't really disclose what architectures are behind their stuff, but I mean, you don't always want to emulate Apple, right? You don't always just want to emulate both the good and the bad. So I wasn't okay with that, but for the most part, look, they got to the point. I thought they did a good job introducing the things. So they introduced the new Razr family, the Droid Razr HD, the Droid Razr HD Max, and then the Droid Razr M. So
they only sampled the M, right? They didn't give you the Razr Max?
Correct.
The Razr HD Max?
Yeah, so both of those are coming later this year. The M, I think, is either about to be available or available now on Verizon for $99, I guess, on contract. That's a pretty cool phone. It's a 4.3-inch display, QHD. It's a tinier phone, right? It's marginally bigger than the iPhone 4S. And just you get a ton more screen, but I like the thing. I've been carrying it with me since New York, and it's a good form factor, man. I like it, and it's fast. And I actually don't even hate Motorola's. I guess is it still Moto Blur?
Yeah, their skin.
Yeah, is it still called Moto Blur?
I believe so. Yeah, I mean it's unofficially. Technically, it's not called Moto Blur, but if you go into the build.prop or the APK, it's still Moto Blur. I guarantee it. So
I don't actually hate their skin. Like it's not. I still prefer stock, but it's not too cumbersome.
It's very ICS-y. Yeah, that's the thing, is that they needed to strike a good balance.
Yeah,
and I think they pulled it off, as much as everybody, sort of derides it.
Exactly. Like the keyboard remains mostly unchanged as far as I can tell compared to ICS. I like the fact that when you're on the home screen, you just swipe once from left to right, and you can get to like all the quick settings that way. That to me seems really natural, and I'd love to see everyone else do that. So yeah, I don't really mind the software layer on top of it, and I think the phone size I think it's a good size. I think the screen, it's Motorola does weird things, and you have a lot to say about this with their displays and how they're calibrated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because ultimately that's a Samsung display, right? And this is what we've talked about a lot off the record, but I mean, not really off the record, but just offline.
Yeah. So it's a Super AMOLED
Samsung
advanced.
will sell you the N-1, and the N-1 in this dev cycle is the QHD display with pentile, and that's what you see. And it's at the OEM's discretion to do their own calibration or just adopt Samsung's calibration curves, and they give you a table and just go from there. And it's hilarious to me because you see a lot of other reviewers say the panel is terrible, but it's the same panel as in the 1S, right? Which is calibrated perfectly. Like it's D65, it's perfect, like just across the board. But for some reason, you'll see other OEMs just struggle to calibrate it right. And you know what I saw? The two that I saw just briefly looked like they still had some issues. But, it's one of those like your mileage may vary things.
Yeah. So my main complaint with it is small text, like zoomed out on a web page, is still very, it looks aliased, right? And I don't know how much of that's
never going to get better.
Yeah.
With pentile, at least.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. But overall, the phone's not bad. Like, I would like to see Motorola experiment more in this form factor. Like, I love to see the really big, Razer HD Max stuff. But I also like to see, a good roadmap for this form factor of device.
I think there's a realization taking place that we've hit the upper bound, and there's a nice place in between the largest and the smallest.
Yes.
Like where largest is 5 inches. Smallest is like 4 inches. So I think we're starting to see OEMs come to that realization that they need a big one and a small one. And then whether that ends up being like a male and female split, that's sort of just a marketing question. But yeah, I find myself going for the smaller devices just because they're easier to pocket.
Yeah, I agree.
So then I can carry like 4 phones or 3 phones or whatever. And
well, so the question is, when do we get... what I don't like now is there's not a silicon trade-off, right? So if you look at the Razer HD or the Razer HD Max, they have the same MSM 8960, which I know you're glad that the Wrigley baseband is out of these things.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion. There was nothing ever really particularly wrong with it. It just was, again, one of those initial solutions that we saw everybody sort of going at it on their own. Like LG had one, Samsung had one, Motorola/TI had one.
Yeah.
The Wrigley one was really hackable. You could do all sorts of crazy things. So, yeah, it's good. Obviously Qualcomm still has the best performance. That was a UE Category 2 device. But on 10 megahertz, it's not as big of a deal as it otherwise would be. But, and to Motorola's credit, they got a lot better in its lifetime. They added discontinuous RX. They added all the cool features so battery life got way better.
That's good.
Yeah.
So Wrigley, for folks that don't know, that was Motorola's own LTE baseband that they shipped in. What phones was it in?
Basically all the LTE phones up until this one. So the Bionic, Droid Razer Max, Droid 4, those all were the same platform. And this is, again, when I sort of look at the phones, I only look at, it's the same platform. It's the same exact board software package, same exact combination of SoC and baseband and Wi-Fi. And really the things that are different are at the edges, like display, the case, battery size.
Yeah.
Right? That was all the same. It was like Wrigley plus MDM 6600.
Yep. So in this case, the original point, you've got MSM 8960, 28 nanometer dual core crate, plus Adreno 225 from Qualcomm. You've got the same SoC in the small phone, as well as the large phone, the Droid Razer HD and the HD Max. But do you think we'll see unity across display resolutions, in the small phone and the large phone as well?
Oh, you mean, will the small phone have the same resolution? I don't think so, no.
So you think, that small phone, you're just gonna have lower resolution?
Don't make a sacrifice. Because a small phone traditionally is like a lower cost device.
Yeah.
So they'll make a sacrifice, and then probably going forwards, you'll see the 8X30 or 8X27 get put in the smaller devices. So like
for folks who don't know,
at lower clocks.
Yeah. So can you take us through what 8X27 and 8X30 are?
So 8X30 is 1.2 gigahertz dual core crate with Adreno 305, and the same modem block basically. And then 8X27 is 1 gigahertz dual core crate, Adreno 305, and then no LTE, so just UMTS up to DCH-SPA plus, or on the 8627 you get just 21.1 or CDMA, and same GPS features, that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
But, yeah, Adreno 305 versus going forward is going to be Adreno 320.
Yeah.
And 225. So,
well, so
it's there's some binning going on there or whatever.
In those parts, you trade CPU performance for presumably better GPU performance, right? We haven't looked at an Adreno 305 yet, but I'm assuming that's faster than 225.
I don't know how they compare on paper at all. That's a good point. I guess we can compare with what we know about 320 and what we know about 305, but I don't think that's necessarily something that's in the public yet.
Yeah, that's true.
At the same time, I think it'll probably be good enough. Again, it's a lower end SKU. It's not as much of a concern. I guess we'll see. It just depends. There's also the, like what happens at the really low end, like 8625, 8X25. That'll be interesting. Again, like that's in the Desire X. So, yeah. We look at the low end too. That's cool.
What so everyone knows, what is 8X25?
So 8X25 is 1 gigahertz dual core Cortex A5 with Adreno 203, and I don't believe they support DCH-SPA plus. So you sort of move down the scale in both your air interface and the application processor, and that's 45 nanometers. So there's some good pricing going on there clearly, and that's it's in the Desire X. So we'll see. That's in a bunch of other things too, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's interesting that Qualcomm, uses vanilla
A5s.
Yeah.
I found that really curious too, because I expected them to move down and just put a Scorpion in something, but who knows? Maybe this is much smaller. On the other hand, I was kind of surprised. The A5 gets a lot of use on their modem side. So basically, all the modems use an A5. Like we speculated a while back that there was an application processor inside some of the modems, because that's what you see in the like wireless hotspots, is that they don't have a discrete AP. And so then it turned out to be true. Yes, there's an A5 in there. So it seems to be like they're really a three core shop at this point. You can either get a Scorpion, a Crate, or an A5.
Interesting. So is the A5 what does all the heavy lifting inside of the basebands?
No. That's sort of, so you get like two different user lands. There's one, one is a user land where you can run Linux and do sort of your routing. The other one is just, I don't know what it's exposed as. Sometimes I see ARM 11. I believe it's ARM v7 now. And that does all the heavy lifting, in conjunction with their DSPs. And there's this weird combination of some things are software defined, some things are baked into hardware.
Interesting.
That's sort of the stuff that we're never going to get told without ever, it ever being able to see the light of day. But
yeah. So for the chips with integrated baseband, you effectively have two crates, an A5, and some ARM v7 thing all on that same piece of silicon.
Yeah, that's right. I don't know if the A5 makes it in necessarily into the crate, the 8960 version. I believe that's sort of separate. Like ostensibly you don't need like a third AP. There's two CPUs per se. I don't know if you need the third A5.
I gotcha.
So they would probably just slice out just the modem block. Like the A5 is sort of separate on these other ones because it's just sort of like an extra feature.
I gotcha. So in the case of the crates, they would use some time slices from them to do some of the baseband work.
No, there's still its own. It's got its own. Excuse me. It's its own CPU. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, I don't know exactly what it is. but it's its own. Yeah, it runs its own real time operating system. It sort of exists on its own.
Okay. So real quick, what did you think of all the Motorola announcements? I know you were doing other stuff, but
yeah, I mean, I followed along that day. In addition with the Nokia stuff, I don't know. I think that I really wish that it was launching with Jelly Bean. I think there's a lot of people who talked about that, and that's sort of an easy superficial analysis that you can run. Is like, hey, it's not launching Jelly Bean. This isn't like what the heck? It's owned by Google now. Yeah. So again, that's just a misunderstanding of the dev cycle. Like these devices were probably getting ready for a long time. I thought the hardware is great. It looked great to me. The other thing is I don't know why there's a Max and an HD Sans Max. I would have just made a Max. I feel like that would have consolidated the lineup a little bit better.
Interesting. So you don't think
just give me the maximum battery.
Interesting. So you don't think anyone would shop, for a high-end device that's still as thin as possible?
Yeah, I just think that's confusing. It's just one more SKU. I really have to wonder how that affects the economy of scale too when you're going to LG Chem or Samsung and asking for batteries. I feel like it's sort of like a false, what's the right word? It's sort of like a false there's like two different products. Why do they really need to be there? It sort of upsells you into the higher one.
Yeah.
I mean, someone's done their homework. I don't want to pretend that I know more, but at the same time, it's just a little bit weird. I would have just gone for the maximum. Like the Razer Max it came later because, hey, this is a great way to differentiate, sort of refresh, bring more attention. I just assumed that when we were going to do this again, just go for like a huge battery and then make that a feature.
Interesting.
So you have the smaller one, right? Like that's the way to sell the smaller one too.
Yeah, that's true. I guess, I'm okay with a 3-device lineup. I do see that. I do see your point though that like if you really wanted to simplify things, you offer the beefy one that's clearly best of everything, and then the smaller one.
Exactly. And then the Nokia the Nokia thing is interesting. So I mean we saw Lumia 920, and it's the corresponding low end, which is the 820, right?
Yes.
So those devices are interesting. I think the 920 is a little bit big, but
yes, it is big. And I actually, so the in-hand feel, I didn't want to say too much about it in our coverage of it because I didn't spend more than let's say half an hour with it. But I didn't actually.
It's always hard to tell in like 30 minutes.
Yeah, I didn't actually like the feel of it. Like it felt solid, but it felt a little too plasticky almost.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still polycarbonate. Is it? I don't know. Did you ever play with the 900? Is it the same polycarbonate as the 900?
So I didn't play with the 900 for that long. It felt like it was something different, but I don't want to say for sure because I definitely didn't have a ton of experience there.
Yeah, because they changed it up between the 800 and the N9, and then the 900. Like it was just a completely different plastic. And it's surprising, but I guess it's not surprising how much that affects the end result.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wasn't a huge fan of the feel, but I'm glad that Windows Phone finally has modern hardware.
Yeah. I mean, it only took this long.
Yeah.
How long has this been? Like 3 years?
No, let's see. October 2010 is when they officially launched Windows Phone 7.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And they launched
as 8X50.
Yeah, so they launched with 65 nanometer single core Scorpion. And then a year later, they updated to 45 nanometer or 40 nanometer single core Scorpion.
Yep, 8X55.
Yep, and then at the end of 2012, they will finally ship dual core 28 nanometer Crate.
Yeah. I'm just so tired of having this discussion with everybody who says that, oh, Windows Phone doesn't need a lot of horsepower. Oh, Windows Phone doesn't need new SoCs. Oh, Windows Phone is not about latest and greatest. Because you just don't get it. If you're saying that, you absolutely don't get it. Like the reason that's there is for all the stuff along the edges, right?
Yes.
Like none of the Windows phones can shoot 1080p video at all, right? Like none of the Windows phones can do any of the other fancy features like higher, like video like it's all the things around the SoC.
Yes.
And yeah, so it's great to see that finally.
It's not just that, I remember when Windows Phone launched, both you and I were huge fans of it, right? But there were three issues.
Yes, yeah.
There were three issues that Microsoft had, right? The first one, they had no like key device partner, right? They had no one that was going to, really go head to head with the Samsungs and the, in the Android space, and the Apples of the world. The second issue was they were shipping undated hardware, and the third issue was they needed to at least equal, if not outpace, Google and Apple in terms of frequency of updates, right?
Yes.
And the people that said that, hey, they don't need to do that, it's a more efficient OS, things like that. No one ever wins by being slower, right? It's in the history of all computing, no one has ever said, hey, I'm going to ship 2-year-old chips and that's how I'm going to beat the competition, or I'm, not going to update as quickly or update just as quickly, and that's going to give me an advantage.
And 5-megapixel cameras. I mean, there's just a litany of things.
Yeah, and it's not
it
really.
Just always felt like it was never getting the attention it deserved, and they made promises early on, like the updates are gonna come like machine gun fire.
Yeah,
like it'll make your head spin. But then just sitting around waiting for updates, right?
Yeah, we got 2 updates, in the year that followed the launch, which was fine. Like 2 updates is good, but Google gave us 2 updates, right? We had ICS and Honeycomb and ICS in the same amount of time, and
they're not spending nearly as much money, right?
Exactly. So that has to change. Like I hope that Windows Phone, what I viewed Windows Phone 7 as was, hey, this is a way of us getting internal credibility within Microsoft to go do something a little more ballsy and bold. And now that we got it, okay, thanks for everyone for supporting us. Now we're, going to use that internal credibility that we have and go off and build Windows Phone 8. My hope
they built the internal credibility, but they killed the external credibility with no updates for people that were early adopters, right?
Yeah, and I mean that's I think from Microsoft's perspective, that 2% of the market or whatever that they have, they're okay if they kind of screw those folks, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Right, like
that's brutal. That's so brutal, but yeah, it is true.
I mean, that's exactly what it ends up being, right? Like that it's hey, thanks for supporting us. Now we can go internally to our bosses and the exec staff and say, look, this funky new UI works, and give us the internal collateral and support that we need. Thanks everyone for buying Windows Phone 7. Hope you come back and
have a nice
buy
day.
Again. Yeah,
you
exactly.
lose, sir.
And I feel like, I don't know. I hope that this all changes, right? I hope that Microsoft's now going to be on the bleeding edge of adapting new SoCs. I mean, not to a fault, but not lagging behind everyone else. Like I said, no one ever wins by being slower.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be like their first, because Android will always be first, and if you care about the hardware, you're using Android.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they can't afford to be 2 years like they were in the past.
Yeah, it has to be current generation, right? Like people always love to incorrectly state that like Apple doesn't care about specs, but
God, yeah, I feel like that's marketing. That's got to be marketing.
I mean, Apple is shipping. They ship Ivy Bridge when Ivy Bridge is available. They'll ship Haswell when it's available, right? They'll ship the latest and greatest, and I think Microsoft needs to. I mean, I remember having this conversation with Microsoft when I was like, look, you guys, you're shipping 65 nanometer single core Scorpion. There's better stuff out there. And they were just bringing up this discussion about, well, dual core is bad for battery life. And
yeah, these are just excuses. Yeah, this is just like standard, I don't want to say FUD, but, FUD.
Yeah. So I'm hoping Windows Phone 8 will kind of change that. The 920, a lot of people are really interested in it. And I don't know if it's because, and there are some cool features, right? So wireless charging, I think, is neat.
Yeah. I don't know. Wireless charging has never been enough to like sell a phone. Like the Pre had wireless charging. And the other thing is that it's really hard to use a phone while it's charging if it's wireless.
Yes.
So, I mean, I guess you could pick it up. But if it's almost dead, then you can't really pick it up.
Yeah, but you can always still plug it in, right? Like the wireless charging doesn't have to be the only way of charging it.
This is true. Yes.
So the wireless charging's neat, and they also integrated, I guess, the latest version of Synaptic's ClearPad 3 touch controller, which allows you to, they call it super sensitive touch, right? Where you're able to actually interact with the display while you're wearing something that's not conductive. So like a glove, or, if you've got a piece of cloth over your hand or something like that, which I thought was kind of compelling.
That is very cool, because that's traditionally been the reason for Nokia's resistance to capacitive, is because obviously it's cold and you got to wear gloves.
Yes, and that actually worked really well. At least with the demo they did. Jason Gregory, both someone Brian and I both know at Nokia, he just did a demo where he wrapped his finger in like a piece of cloth that he'd folded over 4 times, and
wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, he could scroll just fine, and he used the keyboard. It worked. I'm assuming it'll also work with like normal gloves. There was one lady walking around with actual like mittens on that did a demo. So that's compelling. I think those are both neat features.
They sell this normal, like, I don't know if you do winter sports, but I like to go skiing when I can. And they sell these gloves that I use now that have like a little bit of like metal at the fingertips, on the fabric.
Yeah.
And you can use those in conjunction with the phone, so I can text while skiing now.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really big into the winter sports thing. I don't know. Just, I don't like the cold, and then sports in the cold just doesn't work with me.
It's doubly bad. Yeah.
Yeah. And most of the sports seem like I'm just most definitely going to break something, even though most of my like sports related injuries come from like basketball anyways.
Uh-huh. I've gotten surprisingly good at texting while skiing. It's surprising.
How do you not run into trees and stuff while doing that?
Oh, it's just peripheral vision. Like again, the human vision system is like this amazing software defined thing. So you can just build that out,
Hold on. What do you mean build that out?
Like if you get used to looking out of your peripheral vision and looking in the center, then you can avoid hazards pretty well. I'm serious.
That's. I mean, it makes sense. We're good and adaptive like that. It's just a hilarious way of you referring to the human vision system, like it's a feature in a phone.
Oh, it's totally a feature. Yeah. The brain is crazy.
For anyone who doesn't know, Brian is an optical engineer, so this is not unusual for him to go into this kind of a discussion.
Just go off on a tangent. I'm sorry. What were we talking about? What's cool tangentially about the human vision system is that because the image we form is upside down, if you revert the image using like prism glasses, then after like a day or so, your brain will flip that image, and then you'll see the like right side up image. So you'll get used to not having the image being flipped in your it's projected on the retina. And then when you take the glasses off, you can really screw with your head, and then you'll be back to flipped for like a day and then flipped again. And you can do this with like, they sell a bunch of different prism glasses, and you can really mess with your head.
Wait, so you're saying normally your brain does the flipping of what it sees, so everything looks upright.
That's correct. Yes.
And then if you wear glasses that flips that, you'll eventually get.
Yeah, your brain will within a day or so get used to it, and it'll be like, hey, this image that I'm getting presented with is now right side up. That doesn't make any sense. Let me stop flipping.
Yeah.
And then you'll see normal. But then when you can take the glasses off, at any time, and then after a day or so, that adaptive process will happen again.
That's hilarious. Have you done this?
No, I haven't, but I've always wanted to. I want to buy some of those glasses.
And where do you even get these glasses from?
Just on Amazon. They just have some prisms in them. I don't know. I can't remember what type of prism. Maybe it's like I want to say a Risley prism. I don't really remember. I memorized all the prisms at one point, but just like an inversion prism.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, so
scary.
that kind of lends into the next big part of the 920 discussion, which is the camera system on it. And I know
God.
you. So before we get to the naming for all of it, they have optical image stabilization, which they didn't really say a lot about. The specifics there. I don't know if you were able to glean any more from what was announced.
No, not really. I mean, honestly, I looked at it all. They didn't really call out anything specific, but it is an optical image stabilization system. They had a brief white paper on the what's in the 920, but there wasn't too. I didn't look at it too heavily. We'll look at it more in the review. I
Yeah.
think the bigger thing is, as soon as I saw the sort of like leaked images, it was obvious that this wasn't, what's the right word? This wasn't like a 41 megapixel, sort of what people think when they think of PureView. I guess phase 1 they're calling it versus PureView phase 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I tweeted out, like Retina is analogous to Apple, as PureView is to Nokia. And what I meant there was that it can sort of mean whatever they want it to mean whenever they need it to mean something. So again, that's what happens when you assign a buzzword to something. And I'm sure it looked like their low light performance was really good. And obviously OIS is new. Everybody has EIS, which is the electrical image stabilization. But we'll see how good it does in reality. It looks like they can get a 2 or 3 stop improvement just from OIS, which isn't bad. But it's not PureView in the sense that it's oversampling, which is what everybody was sort of hoping for.
Yeah, and I think that would have been nice for sure.
I made this point to somebody else at the HTC event that I was at, and I said, here's the PureView 808. Just give me Windows Phone on it. This isn't that hard. Just change the SoC, do all the camera customization, keep all that discrete stuff discrete, because that is one of the things you can customize in Windows Phone, is everything about the camera. You can't customize any of the like skin. You can't customize beyond what what SoCs are allowed, but you can customize whatever you want with the camera. So just give me a PureView 808 with Windows Phone and just call it a day. I don't care that it's huge, I don't care and that it's big. Just do that. This is simple.
Do you think there's a market for that?
Absolutely. I mean, well, I don't think it's a very big market. There is a market. It exists. Is it huge? No. I mean, but then again, is the market for like the Nikon S800C or the Galaxy camera big? No. Those are going to be not commercial successes, but that's part of the iterative process that we're going through, where the camera is moving towards a smartphone and the smartphone is moving towards a camera. And again, there's that age-old argument, that sort of one-liner, that the best camera is the one that's on you all the time. So, yeah, I mean, I think that would have been obvious. Like, that was obvious to me. I don't know why, obviously there's some reason that didn't exist, or somebody didn't want to do that. But to me, that was the easy explanation, the easy, lowest. You have that design. Just make it work. Just adapt it slightly, right? And like the 920 is like clearly an adaptation of the 900 slightly. Yes. So, again, this is me armchair engineering everything, so I could be vastly wrong.
Well, I think from Nokia's standpoint, they're still not in a place where they have the luxury of just introducing whatever, right? Anything they introduce has to be commercially as successful as possible.
That's true. That's a good point.
Right? Like I feel like there have to be people within the company that are like, oh, hey, we should go do this, and other people that are thinking, yeah, it's we still need to make a lot of money, right? Like we've stopped hemorrhaging, but we need to still be a real force in this industry, and we're not yet. We're still trying to pick up there.
And it's sad because they were, and they had this tremendous leadership, and I guess that's the status with all these other players. Like first it was Palm, then it was RIM, now it's Nokia. I mean, who else? You can just go down the list.
Yeah,
it's the case with all of them. Nobody's nobody's perfect. I think at the same time, Nokia has always been the most aggressive when it comes to imaging performance. Like a lot of the people at the College of Engineering, I remember when I initially started, were from Nokia, and spoke highly of it. So they've clearly developed a lot. Spent a lot of time working on this problem. And at the same time, when you're delivering something that's very close to sort of this standard imaging system for these other smartphone modules, it starts to become difficult to really say we have a competitive advantage, right? Like the low light performance is one thing, the steady video is one thing. Again, I think steady video is a little bit less because everybody has EIS, like that's just done.
Yeah.
And everybody has rolling shutter correction that's just done. So I don't know, question mark. We'll see how it performs. They didn't talk a lot about the front cameras either. And the front camera is something that needs to see a lot of improvement and that people just sort of write off.
Yes.
But again, I don't really know, right? Like I can only armchair here. The pixels can't get very much smaller. We're at 2 waves right now. You can't really get below 1 wave. So I think that they did more harm than benefit with the whole like let's fake the video thing and then let's fake the images thing with the diffraction spikes.
Yeah.
That was, I don't know who was responsible for that. That was just a fiasco, and it's unfortunate. Like, and we don't ever drum up that stuff because that's sort of like tabloidy.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, like we don't care, like that's just, like I don't care. It doesn't go in the review. Like somebody screwed up. This is probably some marketing.
Yeah.
But it doesn't help their case.
See, it was surprising to me that there was all this like hoopla over the faked images because their actual images that they generated at the press event were good, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like there was, and that's why I didn't even understand. Like, yeah, they faked it. Okay, that's a discussion, but the discussion should have been around like, hey, how good were these images that they produced? The demo they had was pretty cool. Like they had a little dark chamber with a vase with flowers in it, and you could stick your camera in there, your phone, or the 920 test system test phone that they had set up, and snap off a picture. And low light performance was tangibly better. Right, we included one shot versus the 4S, which obviously the iPhone 4S is using kind of dated hardware by comparison, but there was a very big low light performance difference there.
So they didn't let you take the image with you, though. That's the thing, right? They let some other players take the images with them, but no.
Yeah, I asked if I could get a copy of the file, and they said that wasn't okay.
Yeah, and I heard the video OIS is not final yet.
Yeah, I don't know. A lot of the stuff there, one, because, Microsoft is still kind of pulling strings in the back.
Yeah.
And
still
Microsoft
updating the OS. Yeah.
Yeah. And Microsoft did the same crap at Computex, right? Where they were like, look, there are only certain parts of Windows RT that are okay to show off, and no one is allowed to, flip beyond these screens or do anything beyond this.
Yeah,
and
that's been their MO forever, it seems.
Yeah. And I remember, hey, look, 10 years ago, Microsoft's the only game in town, and it's okay to kind of make those kinds of claims because what else are you going to do? But, with Windows RT, with Windows 8, Microsoft's not really in a position to kind of make these sorts of stipulations and demands. And I get that they're trying to control perception, but I don't know. I think it's almost better to say, look, there's some rough edges, but here you get kind of an idea of what things are going to be.
I completely agree. I couldn't agree more. Like, just because they're not in the position to sort of tease the thing to anybody.
Yeah.
At the same time, they need some platform evangelists that aren't Microsoft.
Exactly.
The only way you're going to get those is if you show a real demo. And I think the majority of the tech press that, isn't the tabloidy sense is willing to understand that, this is not RTM yet.
Yeah.
Like, we're mostly adults here. Again, all the Windows 8 builds leaked, and you didn't see like the world fall apart. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that they're just saving, like you've said, they're saving the hoopla, for themselves and their own announcement, and sort of drum up attention in sort of like an Apple-y kind of way.
Yeah, but see, I think it's a mistake, right? Because you're, especially when there's a lot of discussion about Windows RT, and I feel like if there's a chance that it's not going to be perfect, it's better to let people discover that along the road rather than have expectations that it's going to be awesome and then do this big unveil and then everyone's just disappointed on day one.
Sure. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So I don't know. I think,
obviously, yeah, managing expectations is a huge part of this business.
Yes.
And everybody has to do it. And their approach to managing expectations is, you will have no expectations at all.
Yeah.
We will surprise you with either good or bad on the day that it happens.
Yes.
Right.
And I don't think Microsoft. I think you and I are just on one side of the fence from Microsoft on this one.
Yeah, they clearly don't see it the same way.
Yeah. I mean, part of it, you have to give Microsoft credit, right? That this is, in many ways, Microsoft was a lot like Intel in the Pentium 4 days. Big conservative company, has been doing things a certain way for so long that it's difficult to get them to not behave that way.
Yeah, sure.
But Intel changed. I would assume that Microsoft could as well. So yeah, that's kind of Nokia. I think what I concluded from the 920 was it's a good device. It fixes, some of the issues that we've had with Windows Phone, better hardware, newer OS. It's not going to be the thing that solves, and gives Microsoft, 15, 20, 25, 30% market share. But it's a step in the right direction. What really matters is, do we just wait another 2 years before the next major update, or is Microsoft going to kind of push things more aggressively now?
Yeah. I mean, time will tell.
Yeah.
Who knows? I think they'll stick on 8960 probably for a while. But again, that's because really the only options are either more crates or later on, the crate respin. You know what I found more interesting about that device is the 5-band LTE thing.
Yes.
And specifically the 2.6 gigahertz LTE compliance, because that immediately tells me that it's the new transceiver WTR 1605L, and that tells me that that's available now. So that'll be interesting to see. You get a one very high port 2.6 gigahertz, which is rapidly becoming like a very common international LTE band.
Yeah.
And that's on there, and the rest of the LTE bands are just there because all the ports are created equal, so you can do LTE on the same band you're doing WCDMA. So that's why you see the 800, 900, 1800, 2100. But I found that very curious, very like in a cool sort of way. But that's just me. I'm always like, I want the phone that has the most bands.
No, I mean,
the
that makes sense.
coolest radio, yeah.
Right? Like, we should all care more about that, right? And I don't know.
Which is why the Galaxy Nexus is really hard to carry around. Like, even though it has Pentaband, it's really hard to carry around because it has no receive diversity, has no interference cancellation, has no advanced radio features. Just like it's that, like just deal with it. You get like 3 or 4 megabits max. So, oh well.
That's disappointing. Do you notice a difference?
Yeah, there's a huge difference. Yeah, and again, people, I don't know, maybe people realize this, and maybe they don't, but yeah, there's a huge difference in the RF performance between some of these devices. Yeah, absolutely. It's like gigantic. And again, that's the thing. I'm kind of still upset that Intel is sitting on Xgold 6260, and that just sort of like is the solution that we see everybody ship like forever.
Yeah.
And there's no impetus to do anything better because it's so well understood now.
I mean, they have a roadmap, right? Like, you've seen their LTE stuff.
Yeah, but I want to see it ship, right?
Yes.
I haven't seen it pop up anywhere. Like,
no,
I'd love to see the DCHSPA Plus stuff that they've shown. And the website is so out of date. Like, the most up-to-date information I have about all those parts was I took all those pictures in that meeting room. Do you remember that?
At MWC?
I still go back to those. No, I was like, hey, just excuse me, I'm going to take pictures of like every square inch of your wall. Yep. Do you remember that?
Yeah, no, totally. There was we were at a meeting, Brian and I were meeting with Dottie Perlmutter, right?
Yeah, so I was like, hey, I'm going to be rude. Just like, excuse me for a second. I'm going to take a picture of like everything on your wall.
Yeah, because they had all of the Intel baseband or the Intel Infineon baseband silicon on the wall with like descriptions of features. And
a reference design, yeah, like PCB.
Yeah, and Brian, you're right. Like, you can't get that information. Like, Intel has a fairly decent arc.intel.com site for all the chip architecture stuff.
Exactly.
But there's none
of that for the Infineon stuff or the Infineon wireless. Like, now it's Intel Wireless Group.
Yeah, but that's the MO for everything Intel in ultra mobile right now, right? It's they're so serious about it, but they're clearly not as serious about it as they are with the rest of the stuff. Right?
Well, maybe that's our fault. Like, maybe that's my fault for not making this more of an issue. Cause and effect. I don't know what the this is sort of like a feedback loop of there aren't enough people caring so that they'll improve the site because I'm not doing enough job enough of a job talking about it.
Yeah.
Because there's not that information, or maybe, you know, like I'm lazy and I should get on the phone more.
Yeah.
I don't know what the deal is, but
Well,
you know,
IDF
personally, it's just like anecdotal knowledge that I like having, and it is important. And I don't know what else to say other than like literally what was on the wall there is more than I've seen in the past since then.
Yeah. Well, no, I think it's an embodiment of, like I said, a much bigger issue with Intel's ultramobile group right now, which is it's still not as important to Intel as a whole, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't see, you know, there's still lagging.
Well, and all that stuff is on TSMC 40, right? Like, when are we going to get this on? You're making it on your own fab.
Yes, exactly.
And there's no information disclosure about stuff like that. And I don't know if that's because nobody's asking. Like, I asked, but I gotta, you know, like, we can't really tell you. / it's not a big priority. / it doesn't really matter. But at the same time, of course it matters, right? Like, come on.
No, it's true. I don't know. It's really frustrating with Intel because I know they have the ability to be doing so much more right now, and it's not happening. Which, you know, I guess part of that is them not having the customer wins, but part of them not having the customer wins is they're not being super aggressive on the silicon side either.
Yeah, another catch-22.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. It'll get better, I guess. Yeah.
So then last thing about what we did last week, what can you say? You were at so I went to like the kind of general press announcements for Nokia and Motorola, but you went to like this ultra exclusive HTC event.
The HTC frequencies.
Yeah.
I mean, you can say the name. So it's #freaks. That was a lot of fun. And yeah, it's like 90% of it is under NDA, but I mean, they did a good job sort of like framing, you know, what is HTC, what does our design process look like, you know, just like general overview stuff, not necessarily things that become news. Like the news out of there was the tripod, you know, like there's the tripod for the 1X that's crafted out of metal, which is really great. And the cushiony at Oaks, like Fashion Week 1X, which is like black and white and has a custom skin. And I pressed really hard to try to get one because I like having the one-offs. But that one, I was told I need to be a Victoria's Secret fashion model to even have a shot. So they only have 100 of them, and only 100 people that are invited get to use that thing. So none of even these like ultra exclusive, you know, like tech journalist people, which, you know, like I don't consider myself an ultra exclusive tech journalist people. Like I'm just like I'm here.
Yeah.
But none of those other people got them either. So, but I mean, it's kind of cool. It's like black and white, and it's split down the middle, and it's two different plastic pieces, and it's a 1XL inside, so the AT&T 8960 1X, but it doesn't have the AT&T logo on it, so it has the HTC logo on it, and I don't know, it looked cool, but again, you need to be like uber fancy and cool to get it. So I was told, yeah, there's no way you're getting one unless you have basically a sex change and / like rippling abs or something, which I don't. And I don't know what else there is to say. I think I had a great discussion about whether they should bundle the tripod, and my feedback is that if you're a smartphone vendor that's focusing on camera, then yes, you need to bundle the tripod, even the tripod mount, even if it's just something that's plastic. You know, like Nokia bundles a tripod mount with the Lumia, you know, I mean the PureView 808, and there are a couple other tripod mounts that I've seen, and you know, even if it's not necessarily something the customer is going to use, it conveys a message that you're serious about camera performance enough that you could put it in a tripod, you know, like just the 1/4 screw mount, that's all it is.
Yeah.
And so I have like a gazillion of those. I've been through all the ones on Amazon, and most of them don't accommodate devices bigger than 4.5 inches diagonal screen, and I've broken a few because I shoved the big phones into there. And I think going forwards, yeah, if you want to be taken seriously, as we have great camera performance, it does make sense to ship a tripod mount, because yeah, I mean, like I'll use it in a tripod. Personally, it makes my life easier because I can, you know, do the smartphone comparisons with the tripod.
Yeah.
And you know, like in a bracket, like I use a dual camera bracket. I stick it in the Manfrotto like 550X or whatever tripod. And so so basically my answer was yes, you should absolutely have one. But they're looking for feedback about whether it's worth it for them to run more for other products. And yeah, again, I think any rational person could say and should say to HTC, like, just tell them, like, tweet at them or something, that yes, you need to do that. I don't know what else was really on the record. There was a meeting with iSupply, who is kind of cool. So I could talk with them, and they did like a teardown of the 1X. And, I kind of talked about, like, with them, their struggles and what teardowns are like. And we don't really do teardowns per se, but we look at the internals, of course. So we have mostly orthogonal, goals. They're trying to get to a dollar amount. We're trying to understand, what's inside.
Yeah.
But just a lot of really great discussions, not things that are necessarily going to go into an article.
Yeah. Well, so one thing that the whole point of this, like, frequencies event is really to give us a better understanding of how HTC works as a company. And I'm curious, Brian, what your impressions are. I came away from the last frequencies event 6 months prior. I was pretty impressed with HTC. Like, they definitely understand quite a bit about the market, and at the same point, they're willing to be very upfront, transparent, frank with editors under NDA. But and I think it's they're being very progressive as a device maker.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that absolutely, like 100%. They know what's going on, and they're not a Samsung. I think they're a little bit more agile in that they're smaller, and they know that. They know where they are in the spectrum of things. And, they put up some slides with, various stuff. And, I think exactly, I'd agree completely with what your characterization is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there are companies that I've worked with for a decade that haven't been as frank or as open or as transparent as HTC has been at these frequency events, which I think is saying a lot, right? Like, this is a company that's still fairly young in doing all of this interaction with the press, being its own, like, kind of device maker, stuff like that. So I don't know. I'm impressed with what they've done thus far. And I'm also still really a big fan of the entire one line with the 1X and the 1S.
Me too. I think that doesn't get enough. I don't know if it's a correct to say that, but yeah, the one line deserves a lot more love than it gets.
I agree 100%. I feel like since the Galaxy S3 launched, which, even you said it was a great phone, I feel like that's what everyone flocks to, right? It's either that or the iPhone. But
obviously, that's a function of marketing dollars as well.
Yes.
I think that's a big thing that people need to realize. And it really occurred to me even more, when you're, like, I spend a lot of my time indoors, but when you go outside and you see, for example, in the, Dallas airport, that airport was entirely owned by Samsung, right?
Yes.
It's just like everything is Samsung. So, yeah, I think some of that is a function of marketing. Obviously, the Galaxy S3 is a great device too. But, I'd agree with that. Absolutely.
Yeah, and this was curious. So you and I talked about this a bit. How much sense would it make, no pun intended, for HTC to really pursue doing another Nexus device?
So I actually had a really long conversation about this, and I think there are a bunch of different viewpoints on the matter. And I think some of what their policy is still under NDA. But my theory there is that, even though the Nexus devices until the Nexus 7 don't sell a lot of units to make it worthwhile, it makes it worthwhile in the sort of mindshare and development platform, and you sort of define what the status quo and what the reference design looks like for the next version. And so even though it isn't a big money maker, it's a huge thing when it comes to perception and getting, that sort of engineering work with Google and that relationship. And then again, perception, perception is king because that's the reality. And again, Samsung having so many tries at the Nexus phone, it conveys that sort of, if you want, a de facto Android device, you need to go to Samsung. And at the same time, I think, the original two devices, if you look at the HTC, the G1, the T-Mobile G1, and then the Nexus one, those were both HTC, and like HTC shipped the first Android phones. I think that needs to come back a little bit. Like, I'd love to see just a vanilla 1X that runs, as a Nexus device. And again, there are these rumors, and I don't necessarily subscribe to them, that there's going to be like 1 million Nexus devices this next, refresh.
Yeah.
But again, I think it would be huge for HTC to have that.
Well,
I think it's bigger than a lot of people realize, because it defines who's the who's the canonical, this is the Android core when I want none of the nonsense. What is that, right? So that's huge.
Yeah, and I think I think you touched on it perfectly, right? So you look at the branding benefits from Asus having its logo on the Nexus 7, right?
Yeah,
like,
it's
that's
huge.
You can't.
It's
can't
validation.
Exactly. You can't pay enough to get that kind of marketing, especially because it's a good device. Two, look at what that does to Asus being able to bring Jelly Bean to its other tablets.
Exactly. Yeah, this is the point I've tried to make many times, and there are marginal levels of success, but this is huge. And for an OEM, I think that they shouldn't underestimate the power of Nexus.
Yes.
And again, there's this argument that's always going to exist about, well, that's sort of like the geeky crowd is like, I hate the word geek, but it's like the ultra enthusiast crowd that's savvy with what is the Nexus device at any given time.
Yeah.
But again, it's the high end that drives the middle and the low, and I don't want to say it trickles down, but it's sort of like they make the purchase advice and influential, like advice that makes the other people make their purchase decisions. And I think it's bigger than a lot of people realize. And at the same time, the Play Store is now sort of like the place to go buy these unlocked phones. And we're seeing prepaid start to take off, like Simple Talk and the T-Mobile plans. And again, it's sort of like a convergence of a bunch of different factors. So I don't think it's to be underestimated at all, the power of getting the Nexus choice.
Yes.
At least, from my perspective.
No, I agree. I do think that it's a bit absurd that this is the way it works, right? I would much rather everyone have access to latest and greatest software, but I given the way the world works currently, I think it does behoove HTC to kind of participate in that.
Yeah, but at the same time, it doesn't make them any money, so it's it's a hard sell. It doesn't make anybody any money, I guess, except for maybe Asus now, and that's a recent phenomenon. So
yes, that's true. So that kind of wraps up what we did last week, and then basically we both flew across the country, and that brings us to this week. So IDF starts on Tuesday. And so this is interesting. I was having this discussion with AMD actually earlier. So for years, Intel will do IDF, and AMD will come and grab whatever hotel rooms Intel leaves, and it'll hold meetings there, right? Like all the press is in one place. They're already here to talk about CPUs. Let's just invite them over to our like rogue hotel establishment, and we can talk about AMD CPUs. But Apple having an iPhone event during IDF week down the street from IDF. This is the first time that a company effectively kind of bigger than Intel has
co-opted
impacted
it.
Right? Like, this is the first time, and you see it even on the schedule, right? So on the press schedule, Tuesday is like Haswell, lots of Haswell stuff, because that's what everyone wants to talk about. Wednesday, iPhone Day, what's on the schedule? Software. Right, like the keynote is I like it, and maybe I'm oversimplifying. Like maybe there's just a ton of really cool stuff happening there. I mean I know I'm even speaking at a thing at Intel on Wednesday, but this is kind of like a really ballsy move, right? Like it's Intel has had this date set in stone for a really long time, and Apple just shows up and they're like, yeah, by the way, we're launching our iPhone here. Just a couple doors down from where you guys are doing your big Intel thing.
See, and I always wonder about how that scheduling works. Like whether all these agencies talk to each other through some sort of like back channels.
Maybe, but there are no agencies here, right? Apple doesn't use an agency. This is internal Apple and internal Intel.
You know what I mean, though? Like all the schedulers. Like these people in power who are calling the shots, I guess.
No, I don't know. It's hilarious. Like it's just weird. I've never seen anyone do that before, right? Because the closest was
this whole month is crazy. Like, last week, the week before, this week, the week after. I don't know when it stops. Like, I'm so backed up with stuff, and I know you are too, that there's no way you can get anything done.
No.
When you're flying around constantly.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's no way to get anything done. I mean, we get stuff done, but it's difficult to maintain the amount of depth that we want to go into.
Yeah, that's right. That's the right way to say it.
That's the difficulty in all of it. And I don't necessarily know that I have the right solution there, right? I was talking to someone at the Motorola event, and it was someone from a mainstream tech publication, and they were asking about what we do, and they were like, so, you using the Nokia there for the 30 minutes, so is that a review? And I was like, no, we need at least 2 weeks to get like an actual review done.
Oh God, I hate that, like this trend of I used it for 30 minutes, I'm going to call it a review. This is just entirely like an SEO thing. I know. Yeah,
it's a pain, right? And I hate that like we've even gotten to that point. And I know this is the second time now that we've touched on this issue of something we've always called the cable TVification of the web, right? And I swear one of these times I'm actually gonna just rant for 40 minutes on it. But it's tough. It's tough getting all of that stuff done because it's just there's a lot of work that you have to put into everything. So anyway,
the issue for me too is that it takes a while to get into the mindset where you've loaded all of this stuff into your brain. Like you get in that mood, and like this is the thing that programmers have too, is that there's this immense emotional and mental like loading that needs to happen before you get in the state where like I can write about this.
Yes.
And like I need like 6 hours, and otherwise if there isn't 6 hours, it's like I can't do it. It's not worth it.
Yeah, no, it's true. Like a lot of folks, I know you and I relate on this topic. Writing for me and what we do here is really a very like mental and emotional kind of game, right? It's not as
totally, yeah.
It's not as cut and dry as you'd think, which is surprising given how data driven we are. Right, like it's the actual writing, the creative process is so much more mentally taxing than just, hey, here's some data, I'm reporting on it. One of the things I regret the most actually is that given the like intense push to crank so much out, I don't get to spend as much on the creative process and making the writing more of a I guess a labor of passion versus look, I just need to get this out there as quickly as possible.
Yeah, you mean like creative writing approaches and like
exactly
making it entertaining to read sort of thing?
Which I mean obviously we do a certain amount of, but it's like the difference in spending a month writing one thing versus a week can be huge on the creative writing process.
Well, and you've been at this game for much longer than I have, like just like an order longer. So you've seen the cycle come down from like sort of you could compete at this on a like the instead of a 24-hour or like 12-hour now news cycle, it was like a week.
Yeah.
Or even a month. So I don't know. I couldn't adapt to that. Like I'd be stuck in whatever felt the most comfortable.
Yeah, I mean it's because on the one hand, I get the benefit of instant news, instant everything, right? I understand that's I understand the value in that. I feel like we give up a lot in just the relentless pursuit of that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And all
this stuff, all the question, like all the chance for comment, I mean, even though we don't really ever quote anybody, but we get people to talk about like, is this true? All that stuff is gone if you're just like I reviewed it in 30 minutes and then I sat down next to it and wrote that the 920 sucked or like the 920 was awesome, right?
Yeah, it's difficult. I like I said, I don't know. I mean, I think media in general has always trended towards this, right? The lowest common denominator, hey, let's talk about death, explosions, and all this bad stuff, and that's how we get people to look at us.
Sure.
And
yeah.
I feel like that's just really not right. Right. I don't think the world has to entirely be PBS, but I feel like there needs to be balance. And
Well, we got to be that balance. So.
yeah, it's
a few other places too, maybe.
A discussion for another time, I guess. So anyways, this week, so Tuesday, so tomorrow or today, I guess, when this podcast goes live, bunch of meetings. Tuesday's IDF day one. Haswell's the big deal. So Intel went around and they did some like pre-briefs on really just a very high level with Haswell, right? And the one thing they said is, so Haswell is the, I guess, 4th generation Intel Core microarchitecture, comes out next year. The messaging thus far is the design is done. It's looking good. Things are going ahead of schedule. It's still looking like it'll be a Q2 2013 kind of thing. But the big news is, so we know with Haswell, TDPs come down, right? So Haswell as an architecture, that sweet spot of Haswell is targeted around, let's say, 15 to 25 watts, whereas today it's 35 to 45 watts, basically what goes into a mainstream notebook. So the other data point that we got is Ultrabooks today, the MacBook Air, Ultrabooks, whatever, their TDP, their thermal design point target is 17 watts. With Haswell, that goes down to 10. So that was a bit of new news. The other thing is we may see even lower TDPs, below 10 watts with Haswell, which is really interesting because traditionally, from Intel's standpoint, it's really only been Atom that competes in that single-digit watt
like
range
6 or something, or 9, whatever it was.
Yeah, I think it maxed out at like 8.5 or whatever.
Yeah. I'm curious. So the 10 and 15 watt TDPs, is that dual core or quad core? Or are we talking? They should just quantize it by like, here's single core maximum TDP or lowest TDP.
So if we, all they really said was 17 watts goes down to 10. So 17 watts today is for dual core ultra low volt Ivy Bridge. So I'm guessing dual core ultra low volt Haswell will be 10 watts.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so that's really compelling because 10 watts is like borderline what you can fit into a 3rd gen iPad chassis.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting discussion about the iPad 3rd generation.
It totally is, right? Like that's the A5X is a beast of an SoC, right? They built it on 45 nanometer, which from, our perspective makes it a very hot SoC. From their perspective, you have proven yields at 45 nanometer. It's a cheap process. And if you're building something that's bigger than dual core Sandy Bridge, that's or dual core Ivy Bridge, that's, exactly where you want to do it to incur like the minimum penalty. I don't know. So if Haswell can now go into, these iPad-ish form factors, and if we can get below 10 watts, then you can really start going head to head with, an ARM-based tablet, but with, your best in class, core-based x86 design.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be an Atom. That's a good point.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I don't really know what this means for Atom. Like, I mean, I guess Atom has to go even further down in power consumption. I remember someone at Intel once told me that, Haswell, Intel executives gave the design teams the go-ahead to do whatever it takes to kind of deal with the ARM problem, right? And the ARM problem being that once we get to Cortex-A15 and start going beyond that ARM wants to go up in the chain, right? They want to start getting into tablets and, beefier tablets and notebooks and start looking, at some of the PC ecosystem as a target. So the Intel execs kind of look at Haswell and say, all right, look, whatever you need, die size, resources, engineering, whatever it is, go build it and make this ARM thing not a problem any longer. So it'll be interesting to see.
I like that solution. Just make the ARM problem go away.
Yeah, just like fix this, right? Like it's
as a mission statement. Yeah,
it doesn't fix it going into the phone, but the hope here, from Intel's standpoint, is this prevents it from being a discussion in anything bigger than a phone or an iPad. So I don't know. I'm really curious to see what happens. I'm also curious to see what Apple does in light of all of this. right? Does Apple continue to, if Intel makes a part that is significantly better than what you can get from an ARM-based SoC, and it can fit into an iPad-like device, what happens, right? Does Apple just say, hey, this is clearly the better solution, we're going to do it, and build something else entirely? Or
I still think that's so far off,
Yeah. I don't know.
Just from a software point of view, I don't know.
Just unifying those two, you mean? Having a...
Well, because if you write apps for the iPad, and let's say the iPad magically had an x86 SoC inside, then you still need to run those apps on the iPhone.
Yes.
And there's no easy way to do that because, iOS doesn't have that sort of, luxury of being part virtualized, part, native. It's like all native. So
yeah, that's true.
That's a problem.
So, well, the other thing that Intel announced, or kind of quietly mentioned, is that at the beginning of next year, they're going to do a special run, very limited edition, of 10-watt Ivy Bridge parts. So, so these 10-watt Ivy Bridge parts are basically going to be like very, very limited edition. So this isn't going to be in, anything that's going to ship in tons of volume. But for any OEM who wants to get a head start on building something that Haswell could go into, they can use one of these 10-watt Ivy Bridge parts to kind of get that experience and get the chassis done.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And it really highlights this kind of other point with Intel that as it gets into Haswell, you're going to see much closer cooperation between Intel and the OEMs, similar to what Intel did with the first MacBook Air, right? That they worked very closely with Apple and kind of pulled in this ultra small form factor packaging for CPU and chipset, and kind of only offered that to Apple. I think you're going to see that same close cooperation between Intel and Acer and Asus and all of these other guys to really just bring better products to market. I think Intel realizes that it can no longer just build an SoC or build a CPU or build silicon and just sell it to people and have that be the end of the chain.
Yeah. This thing also has Thunderbolt, right? Haswell also builds in Thunderbolt?
I don't think it's integrated into the chipset. I think it's part of the platform, but it's I don't believe it's integrated into the chip. It might actually. I don't know. So Tuesday, the big thing there is we have hopefully full architecture disclosure of Haswell.
Did you see? Are there any more Lightpeak related things or events at all? Like the Thunderbolt in the optical sense. I don't know if they're still calling it Lightpeak.
Yeah, I'm sure there are Thunderbolt sessions there. So IDF is there's just a bunch of sessions throughout the day that developers or whoever can go around and just learn about stuff. It's honestly one of my favorite trade shows from the standpoint of just learning, because you get the people that invented the standards or who worked on the architectures just sit there and tell you about them, which is really cool. But honestly, I've been traveling around. I haven't had time to flip through the agenda on it.
Yeah, I'm interested in whether that, because I think it was last one you were saying is when they said it'll make the switch this upcoming year, right? So
yes,
I would imagine they must have some sort of announcement.
Oh yeah, they usually have technical sessions on anything that's relevant, right? Like, so they'll do stuff about GPUs, they'll do stuff about new cooling architectures. That's usually there. I would be surprised if there wasn't something about Lightpeak or Thunderbolt going on there. So that's on Tuesday, and then Wednesday is the Day of Reckoning, right? That's the new. That's the day we figure out how wrong.
Day of Reckoning, as in everything is happening at once. Day.
Yes. Well, that's the day we find out that how wrong we've been about what SoC is going in the new iPhone.
I don't want to think about it. Yeah, this is the first time we've been really public outside of just people asking us on Twitter what we think.
Yeah.
So we'll see how much egg we get on our faces as a result.
Exactly. I'm super nervous about it because, again, I don't like making predictions. We're not fortune tellers, right? That's we analyze, run data, and derive based on that. And we made a very bold, hey, this is going to be 32 nanometer A9s running at higher clocks, likely the same GPU running at higher clocks.
And you said that you would be blown away if it was A15s.
Yes.
Me too, because everybody keeps saying there's no way it can be this year, or like maybe end of this year, like last couple days.
Yeah. Or,
Tops.
I mean, the thing is, like, you can ship it today, but not in the sort of volume that you would need.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
So if Apple's able to do that, it means that they are ahead of TI and Samsung, and TI was a launch partner on A15.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I do know that Apple hired one of the chief architects on A15, so, you know, there's obviously value in that. But I don't know. It's that's the one thing that I think I'm most nervous about, just because I don't like making predictions, and then I don't like being wrong about them when they're made, I guess.
Yeah. Well, nobody likes being wrong. But
Yeah.
At the same time, it's fun to play the game, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. And then there was that big audience announcement, right?
That's right. Which was very intriguing because they didn't really they weren't super forthcoming about, you know, we don't know everything about the new iPhone, but we know that certain testing didn't take place, which tells us that it's not going to be enabled.
Yeah,
and at
so
the same
so
time, then they were like, "Oh, we developed a new ear processor for them specifically and met all our deliverables, but we never heard anything after that."
So can you explain real quick, like, what Audience is, what they do, and
Sure.
why all of this is relevant?
So, I mean, obviously, we're talking about phones here, so the quality of audio is a big performance thing. And it's not just important because everybody wants to be able to understand the other party or be understood. It's also important because maximizing the silent gaps when I'm not speaking, and in the other direction too, is a huge part of the battery life savings. So like that discontinuous RX, if you know that, you know, I'm silent and I'm totally silent and you have to get to totally silent, then you cannot send any bits. You can turn off the power amplifier. So you get a huge power savings. Because, I mean, if you listen to like it's interesting for me because I've kind of listened to some of these podcasts without, you know, both of us speaking. And it's surprising how much time there is when I'm not speaking. And when you come to that realization, then you understand why these are important things to maximize. But so what Audience does is they make some IP and some discrete ICs that basically do noise rejection and you know, suppression, and also clean up the noise, clean up the voice, normalization. And there are just so many different techniques that everybody employs, and you see a variety of players in this space. And Audience, their solution is somewhat novel in that they have a combination of feature extraction that they do. So they have a machine learned model for what the voice sounds like and background noises that are common. And then they also use an array of microphones and do some sort of like common rejection. And of course, they can also do this not just when the handset is held up to your face, but in the far field. So like if you're on speaker or if you're using a Bluetooth headset. So traditionally, Apple has been a big adopter of Audience. Like the Nexus 1 was the first device that I saw that had an Audience ear processor. And then we saw it in the iPhone 4. There was a discrete solution. And then what happened in the A5 is they licensed the IP block from Audience and built it into that SoC. So it sort of disappeared into that, you know, that's the floor plan there. And that's where it's been ever since. And, you know, it's an interesting thing to talk about because only Apple sort of licensed it in that way. And Samsung also uses it, you know, in a bunch of different devices. HTC does too. You know, and there are other players in this space too, like TI does some that they sell. And that's in the 1X International and the Galaxy Nexus. And then Qualcomm does their own too with Fluence. And everybody has different techniques. There are some that, you know, use a bunch of microphones, and you can, based on the, you know, you can do things in the time domain and the frequency domain. Again, Audience's solution works in the frequency domain. Others work in the time domain. So like if there's a certain amount of time delay between when noise is reaching you versus when voice is reaching your microphones, you can sort of suppress the noise that way. And those are, you know, like Qualcomm does like blind source detection. TI does like a combination of that, and you know, just things that are common. So anyways, the news like last week on the 6th was that Audience made this kind of rather sudden investor news push that said, hey, we're going to need to revise our earnings expectations because we've learned that we're not going to be enabled. And then this major OEM of ours, this major customer, and their upcoming phone. So, I mean, obviously you can read into it that that's Apple. And then on the call, they sort of named Apple directly, which is a little bit surprising. And so they said, we're not going to be enabled. And it's a little bit vague still whether they're talking about we were included in the die or we weren't included in the product, or whether it's enabled or not enabled. And you can sort of read into that, read into whether you're included or not in the floor plan and guess whether it's going to be an A5X derivative, which is what I was trying to get at. So obviously, if you're not included in the SoC, then it's obviously not an A5, derivative, because the A5 was the first that integrated the audience IP directly. But it's really not clear to me anymore whether they said we are included, but we're not enabled, so that we don't get a royalty paid out, or we are included, but we aren't included. You know what I'm saying? You can sort of you can sort of guess at it. At the time, I was sort of confident that this meant that it wasn't an A5, but now I'm not as confident because you could have just turned it off.
Yeah.
But well, I mean, and the other thing is that Audience has had really good performance, and this is something that carriers stipulate when you're going to be a subsidized device. You need to meet a certain level of there are some standards that it's like MOS, and they're objective measures. There's some that are objective and some that are like blind testing, and you need to meet a certain standard for voice quality to get sold. And I guess AT&T standards are like the highest in the world for some reason. Like, this is the one thing they care strongly about, which is a bit odd to me because when I look at the air interface side, they're just like, yeah, we're never going to enable 64 QAM. Like, just forget it. So, this is important because obviously it signals that Apple feels pretty confident in their own ability and their own, audio team. They've amassed an audio team over a lot of time, but at the same time, there's this move to vertically integrate. And you made a great point about this is all about cost, perhaps. And I think that's your argument. I think it's probably the right one. And that didn't occur to me till a while later that this is just about we don't want to pay a royalty if we don't have to, and it's good enough.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll see. I mean, we're going to run our test. We've been doing our noise reduction test for a long time. And it's really quite shocking how good the voice suppression technology is. Like when I'm running those tests and the little samples on SoundCloud, it is literally so loud that I cannot hear myself talking at all. Like at the point where I say I can't hear myself talk, it's like I need to, like I have a sound meter and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I always ramp up to it and it is so loud. Like I'm sitting in front of those ASUS, AnandTech Sound Science speakers.
Yes, yeah.
And those go really loud before distorting. So I'm like at like 80% max on there, playing like I play Covenant. I have this specific song that I play, like it's from Lightbringer, that album, and it is so loud, and it's amazing because you can't hear it at all. So I mean, we'll see what Apple does, but this is an important thing with all the voice recognition stuff that's going on, for improving battery life, for being something that's a differentiator. And it's kind of bad for Audience because they just went IPO like a couple months ago, 3 months ago. So I don't know. I'm curious to hear more about what your point was. I'm sorry. It's Modern Ruin is the album that I play. Lightbringer. I had to look it up.
No, it's really interesting. One, because the implications or the ramifications of it are huge, right? If it's indeed that the IP is just not present on the die, right? Then it means that it is an all new die. And if you do an all new die, well, what do you integrate? Like what CPU cores, what GPU cores?
Exactly. Yeah.
Or if it's the other interpretation, which is that the stuff is there, it's just not enabled, right? It's not used, and there's this other stuff that Apple's kind of baked into it that's used instead. I suspect we won't really know how good the solution is until a week later or whatever, whenever the phone's available, we can actually start doing real tests on it.
Yeah, or run a test call there, but I mean, it's so impossible when you're demoing these things to know anything.
Exactly.
You know what else is interesting too is that, remember, Apple in the Retina MacBook Pro, they made a big deal about their own noise suppression thing. Do you remember that? I don't know if we talked about, and that's again just a beamforming technique. They have two microphones, and it works in the time domain. So you make like a cone of like a region that's a cone that's going to get accepted into your what's voice as opposed to what's noise.
Yes.
So we'll see. Like you can draw parallels. Are they going to use that? Like they've built their own team. Are they going to use that in the iPhone? Is it going to be a beamforming thing? Is it going to be like we just ripped off audience?
Actually, this reminds me of something that I don't know we even published, or I don't even know if Nokia actually confirmed this or not. But I was talking to Jason over at Nokia at the event, and he mentioned that the 920 has 4 mics that they use.
Oh, that's probably the Fluence solution then.
Yeah.
When you see a ton of mics, usually that's the Fluence solution, 8960. And that's a bit surprising because the 1XL also has the Fluence IP built in, but they've gone with an EarSmart thing to meet the AT&T regulations. So maybe it's gotten better.
I'm not sure.
That's weird. The 920 has that many mics because they can't even do stereo. Like it's not even pure vision or pure view stereo. Like it's mono.
Oh, weird.
Isn't that weird? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that was just unusual to me because, it's obviously it could always be wrong. Like the information could just be inaccurate, but that's what I was told.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. Yeah.
Okay, so my voice is about to die completely. I think this was a good discussion in advance of what's going to happen this week, and then we can recap it all for next week's show as well.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
and we didn't touch on any of the Amazon stuff, so we'll save that to next week as well.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Brian, I will see you out here in a couple days, and thank you all for listening, and we'll be back in about a week.
See you guys.